Okay, so when we left off, you were permed hair, convertible. Starting part two.
Midlife crisis, that's all. But we got through that. So part two, that was the end of my station career story, okay, the 22 years of stations. Now in 1989, I get hired by Scripps Howard to get them into the production business. And I'm the only employee, and I decided the first thing I should do is make sure I'm paid for. If I can do things that'll pay my salary, then other things I want to play with won't cost them any money as far as me. So I got into the news insert business right away. I made a deal with Kiplinger, the financial magazine, to do 3 90-second news inserts a week. Made a deal with Consumer Reports to do 3 90-second news inserts a week. Made a deal with some guy whose name I don't remember, but it was about food. It was a grocer, your neighborhood grocer or something. 3 of those 3 times a week. We supplied them for free to all the Scripps Howard newscasts, and then I sold them around the country to other stations. It paid for me, it paid for my expenses, it paid for my plane fares, and it was successful. And I think I did something else, but I can't remember one of those other news inserts. Then I started working on trying to do some shows. And over a period of 3 years with Scripps Howard, I remember we did a pilot with Tim Reed and Daphne Reed with King World as the distributor. Out of Baltimore, it didn't work. But the Baltimore people we did it with was Arnie Kleiner, who wound up being GM of KBC here in LA for years and years and years, and his program director, Emily Barr, who is now the president of all the NBC O&Os, I think, one of the O&Os groups. So again, as you move along in your career, you get to know people who, if they're good, wind up having even better jobs. I can't remember what else we did at Scripps Howard. I remember one deal we didn't make. I forgot who it was, came to me. They were starting a new show called Montel Williams, and they wanted to know if we wanted to be a partner. And I said, absolutely yes, but I had to run it by my boss, the president of the Scripps Howard stations, who didn't like the idea. So we didn't become a partner in the Montel Williams show, which I think lasted for close to 20 years. Too bad, but at least my programming gut was still there. I can't remember other shows we did, but we did some stuff. I did the Jane Whitney show at Telepictures, which happened to be where Jim Paratori was now the president. Jane Whitney was a talk show. She ran around with no shoes. It was okay. It lasted a year or two, wound up on NBC in the daytime, and then went away. So we didn't have a lot of success there. But it was good for me personally, because I got to get very close with all the distributors and agents out here in L.A. who still didn't know I didn't live in L.A. They had seen me 10 years earlier or 8 years earlier. Now they see me again. They still think I live in L.A. I'm living in Miami. I think we had a success. I can't remember what it is. But anyway, at the beginning of 1992, my boss at Scripps Howard, a fellow named Dick Jansen, the Scripps Howard offices were in Cincinnati, said, well, your kids are out of the house now, aren't they? Yes. I want you to move to Cincinnati. I said, Dick, if I'm going to move anywhere, I should move to L.A. Why am I moving to Cincinnati? Because you're part of our corporate staff. You should be here. So my new wife and I, which we'll get to in a minute, picked up from Miami and moved to Cincinnati. I'll move off to the new wife right now for a minute. So at the end of the 80s, there was a sales lady at WTVJ in Miami where I was the GM who had been there for about 7 or 8 years. And one night I'm walking through the lobby at 7:30, and coming the other direction is this sales lady named Donna. And I'm hungry. And I innocently say, you want to go next door to the joint to have a sandwich? I'm hungry for dinner and I want company. And she said, I'm hungry, let's go. So we went next door to this little dive and had sandwich or something. And we began to know each other because I really didn't know her well, because she was 2 levels down. There was a general sales manager, then there was a local sales manager, then there was a salesperson. She was one of 7 or 8. I mean, I knew her, but I didn't know her well. And somehow that dinner was exciting. And after that, I invited her to a lunch. And after that, I called my boss. and said, I think I really got it for this sales lady here at the station, and I want to start dating her, because I was still in my last year waiting for NBC to take over. And I said, I just want you to know, because I don't want to get into trouble. And he said, as long as you tell her bosses. So then I went to the general sales manager and the local sales manager and said, don't treat her better than anybody. As I found out later, they treated her worse than everybody, just to make sure no one could say we were playing favorites. Anyway, we started to date, and that went on for a couple of years. And then we moved in together for a couple of years, because I was not rushing this time based on marriage number one. And then at the end of 1991, we got married in our backyard, a small ceremony with my kids there, and her mother, who then passed away. So now I had wife number two. It's the beginning of 92, and the guy in Cincinnati says, move up to Cincinnati. So here I am with my new wife, moving to Cincinnati, Ohio, where we move up to an apartment, we buy a house, we settle into the house. On one of my trips to LA, within a week after we moved into the house, I'm offered a job by Columbia TriStar to be in charge of programming for distribution for the whole studio, which I take. Funny call to my wife. How are things going? Oh, the closet people just left. They just built a new closet. I said, well, I hope we can get it when we sell the house, because we're leaving. And so we moved to LA about 6 months after we moved to Cincinnati. And I had to go in and resign to the guy, and it was tough because he was a good guy. But it was a great job for me. So I finally came out to LA. Now I no longer ran a station production company, which I had done twice for Post Newsweek and Scripps Howard. Now I'm coming to run programming for an actual studio. This was syndication programming, first run. And Columbia was the last studio to get in the first run. Everyone else had first run shows. Columbia TriStar did not. They're now known as Sony. So I came in the late summer of 1992, and about 4 weeks into the job, my boss, Barry Thurston, walked in and said, I hope you have a show for us for NATPE. I said, Barry, I've been here 4 weeks, and NATPE's 3 months away. And he said, well, we have to bring something to NATPE. I said, okay. And just by luck, a week later, into my office comes Mark Itkin, the agent from William Morris, and his client Garth Anseer, who at that point, now we can look back, he programmed NBC and Fox and has a pretty illustrious career out here. Garth came in with an idea for a talk show starring this unknown chubby girl named Ricki Lake. He had been to all these other studios, and none of them understood the show. None of them thought it would work. I saw it, being a station guy, as Sally Jesse Raphael flipped, where Sally would do a show, my daughter dresses like a tramp. We were going to do a show, my mother dresses like a tramp. We were going to do everything from the perspective of a 20-something. And I thought it was a great idea. So we made a deal. I met Ricki, who I said was huggable. She was 23 or 24 at the time, overweight, but smart and very pleasant personality.
Did you think she'd do really well on television?
I thought she would. I thought teenagers and young people would identify with her because she wasn't beautiful in that sense of the world. She was overweight. She looked like one of them. And at least what I thought them who watched would look like. And then we came up with a plan, I think it was my idea actually, that we should not put the talk show on in the daytime. We were going to sell it to all these independent stations who were usually last. And we wanted to put it on at 5 in the afternoon because I wanted kids who came home from high school and college to watch the show too. And then we also came up with the concept of double playing it. At that point, nobody's talk show was being double played. This goes back to my Miami days, I guess. I'm the double play king. And so what we did with the show is we'd play it at 5 o'clock on one day, and then a week later we'd play it at 10 or 11 in the morning. And it helped start up the sales division, the media sales division for Columbia TriStar. They had this and they had Seinfeld. So instead of farming it out like they used to do to other companies, they started their own company to sell the barter commercials and the shows. So I'm very proud that that helped them. Meanwhile, the show went on the air, and every month for the first year got bigger ratings than the month before. I think it started at a 1.9 rating, and eventually by year 2, it was doing a 5.3, 1/10 of a point behind Oprah, and beating Oprah in demos. That was a phenomenon. That was kind of the most fun year of my life, because every week you walked in and the ratings were higher than the week before, and it passed everybody. There was no other talk show except Oprah that was ahead of it, and we were almost there. And I didn't expect that. I expected success, but I didn't expect that kind of success.
And were you involved in the production aspects of this at all?
Yes. When you are in charge of development, I was also in charge of current, and there was no current except this. So I was in New York a lot for the kickoff. We did 25 practice shows. That took me a little bit of convincing to my boss to spend $1 million on 25 shows that weren't going to air. I said, look, we want to go, this came right back to Antisappointment. It all ties together. I don't want to put on a show and the first day people watch it and don't like it. I said, we have to be ready. She has to know what she's doing. We have to go through how to produce this. And interestingly enough, we didn't have a show that we could air till show number 23. So we did it right. And it worked out.
What were some of the things that happened in show 1 that had to be corrected by the time you got to 23?
First of all, she didn't know what questions to ask because she had never done this before. We had an IFB in her ear. There was a fellow named Stuart Krasnow in the control room giving her questions to ask. There was the exec producer, Gail Steinberg, on the floor with the big boards and writing things. And we really had to help train her to be an interviewer. We also had some strange guests. Part of my job, as simple as this, and people never notice it, we had to reposition the audience. The people who looked like they were too low class or had no teeth or you didn't want to be in the shot, we put them on the sides of the audience. And we put the better-looking people in the middle. So when Ricky would come up and stand in the audience, you'd see better-looking people around her than some of the people that showed up that we didn't want to show. That's producing the audience. You have to do that. And I see sometimes, even today on talk shows, they just have people in the audience wherever they sit. Sometimes that's not good. You'll see old people when you don't want to see them. You got to produce the whole thing. Everything has to be produced. The guests, the pre-interviews, everything else. We even hired someone on Ricky Lake who was a lawyer that was the person who checked out the people. We didn't want to be bamboozled by actors. We wanted real people with real stories. This lawyer would be our fact checker. They checked to see if the story was right. They called neighbors sometimes just to find out. So one thing that we were really thought was important, and this goes back to something I said earlier, honesty. We wanted to get honest people. But these were not the people that you hang out with for the most part. The calculation back then was there are 2 daytime audiences. There's the soccer mom audience, the people who watched Regis, and the people who watched Oprah. That was one type of audience. Then there was the other audience, the people who now watch Jerry and Maury, and they watched Ricky and Jenny Jones. That's the other audience. And I'm not going to say anything pejorative about the other audience, but there's a lot of them out there. And what we were surprised at is all the college kids that watched Ricky Lake, which we didn't expect. We were hoping for, that's why we put it on at 5 o'clock, but we really weren't sure how many we'd get. The 2 audiences who watch daytime, let me put it this way. About 1/3 of America has less than a high school education. About 1/3 of America don't make much money. About 1/3 of America solves its problems by yelling and screaming at each other. Okay. That's like 100 million people. Okay. If 10% of those people are really crazy, that's 10 million people. If 10% of those people want to go on TV, that's 1 million people. It's a lot of people to draw on for a free trip to New York, nice hotel room, We had to get a hotel that nailed down everything, including the TV sets. Sometimes it was a first trip for anybody to come to New York, but the stories were real, and we had some tough stories. I remember my daughter told me the first show I took her to at Ricky was, I just got out of prison and I want my woman back. But then we did nice shows. I'm in Love with a Food Service Worker was one of my very favorite shows. Very timid people who would go into McDonald's or Burger King because they had a crush on the person behind the cash register. And we brought them out together to meet their crush. And sometimes they'd actually go on a date. And, oh, I like him. I didn't know he liked me, kind of thing. And so they weren't all crazy shows. But I used to describe it when people said, how can you do that? I used to say, well, here's my favorite show. I said, how about a 40-year-old mama's boy who listens to everything mama tells him, who marries an 18-year-old virgin, and after a while, they both cheat on each other. And the guy's sister-in-law is a drug addict. I said, you think it's a good show? And everything, yeah. Well, I just described the royal family of England. Princess Charles, Di, and they go, oh, yeah. I said, now, the royal family's not going to come on the show. I said, but stories like that exist, and that's why you shouldn't put them down, because it does exist at all strata. It's just that the more educated or the better socioeconomic people won't do the show. But it happens on all areas. And I actually have a distant friend who had an affair with his secretary, and she got pregnant, and one of her 3 kids is his, and yet he's still been married to his wife for years. So, and that happens, and that didn't happen in the I didn't graduate college, I make no money group. So it just shows you that there's a million stories in the naked city. Anyway, Ricky took off. We had a great second year. Just when she hit her peak, she got arrested for demonstrating with PETA, which kind of took a little out of our PR. But the show lasted 11 years and made Columbia hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And that put me on the map in town, too, because all of a sudden I was getting called by all these producers who wanted me to look at their show. My favorite thing at this time was I was 50 years old. And producers would talk to me on the phone and hear my voice and think I'm like a 28-year-old. And when they stumbled through my door, they would do double takes. Are you Alan? And I loved it. They all thought I was this young guy, because who could do a young show but a young guy? Well, maybe I'm young at heart. And then I did another show called Dragon Tales, which played for years on PBS. We found a book in Orange County by a guy named Ron Redeker called Dragon Tales, which is about a dragon who had the fears of 3-year-olds. If the 3-year-old was afraid of the dark, so was the dragon. So we thought this would make a great kid's show. My boss at Columbia said, we're not in that business. I said to him, if I can get the funding for the 40 half hours we need to do, can I do it? He says, yeah, but don't spend any time on it. It took about 4 years. The final deal wasn't made till after I left Columbia. We got $5 million from Kellogg's. We got $5 million from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I made a deal with Sesame Street to be our 50-50 partner. We needed $17 million to go. We started selling off the rights to foreign. We started selling off the rights to cassettes and DVDs. We didn't know what DVDs were then. And all we kept was the merchandising for Sesame Street and us. And after all those years, it raised the $17 million, and they went into production. I was now gone, but that was my baby. And it played for years and years and years on PBS. And they even had Dragon Tales on Ice touring. And the company made some good money off of the merchandising. So that was the one that gets me into heaven as opposed to some of the other shows. I did a couple of flops. I did a show called The News, which was a skit comedy show, which I thought was pretty good. But what we found out about skit comedy shows Monday through Friday is people only watch Friday. They're not staying up late to watch a skit comedy show on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday night at 12 or 12:30 in the morning. So it was pretty funny, but it didn't make it. And then the other show I did, was this at Columbia? Yeah, I think it was. I did a talk show with Tempest Bledsoe and Dick Clark Productions. Dick came in and said I could get Tempest And we thought, well, if Ricky worked, why can't Tempest? But it didn't. It didn't. It just, for some reason, there were too many of them at the time. She didn't work.
How long did you give it?
A year. But the greatest thing there was standing in a control room with Dick Clark. It was so cool that he really was a hands-on producer. And you learn a lot as you move along. And one thing I learned from Dick Clark is if you tell the audience is starting at 2, start at 2. He says, because emotionally they're ready. If you start at 2:20, they've already reached their peak and come down. Nice lesson to learn from Dick Clark, who knew a lot about a lot. And when the show finally failed and we were done, I said to Dick, can I go to lunch with you and talk about American Bandstand? And he said, sure. Well, we had this wonderful 2.5 hour lunch where I was just a fan of American Bandstand, asking question after question about things. And I thought it was really cool that I got to do a show with Dick Clark. And over the years, I met Charlie O'Donnell, who was the announcer for American Bandstand, and it was kind of fun. One of the best things about living in L.A. and doing shows is bumping into people who were television icons when you were a kid, and you got to meet with them and talk with them and learn from them, and I just loved it. So I'm still the kid who loves television. So that was Columbia. And then in Sony. In 1996, after my 4-year deal at Sony, Jim Paratori, who was running Telepictures, and I would talk regularly because we were good friends. And we had always wanted to start our own production company. But we never had deals that ended at the same time. We'd keep leapfrogging each other. So he finally called me in 96 and said, look, I worked for you for 11 years. How would you like to come work for me? So we made a 4-year deal at Telepictures, Warner Brothers, and I came over there. Because all along, Jim kept saying to me when I was still back in Miami and he was out here, you got to come out here. We're smarter than these people. I said, no, Jim, they're smart people. You're in Hollywood. He said, no, you don't understand. In syndication, they keep promoting producers to the role of developers. He said, nobody from the stations is out here doing development, and we know what to buy. He said, that's what I mean. That's what I mean by we're smarter. They don't have the background. They know how to do the show. They don't know how to pick the show. We know how to pick the show and do the show. So when I came out, I found out he was right. So when we decided to work together, we thought, well, we should do well. Well, we did. Every year we had a hit. And it was basically because we knew the audience.
This was Telepictures?
Telepictures. So I went over to Telepictures, Senior VP of Programming, the same title I had at Columbia TriStar, and Jim was the president. And we worked together on a bunch of shows. I also was in charge of Current, which was Extra and Jenny Jones. I had to go through Jenny's second trial with her.
Can you talk about that?
I could talk a little about it, yeah. Jenny was innocent. You can't believe the media when they were talking about all the stuff that went on. When it got down, the second trial got the facts out, and Jenny won on appeal, and it was all thrown out. It was about this murder that occurred because of the show. It didn't occur because of the show. These people knew each other before the show. They dated after the show. There was a tiff between these two guys. One guy was afraid to let his father know he was gay. It was just all kinds of stuff going on. But it wasn't the show that did it. But the Nancy Graces of the world were out there, and I don't respect her at all, talking about guilt, 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 when the facts said no. So my opinion of Nancy Grace is rumor mongering.
What about Jenny Jones? What was your involvement with
Well,
the case itself?
with Jenny, we actually had to get her a person to help her practice how to be on the stand. Jenny is this very sweet woman who could be beaten up by bad lawyers. So we had to give her training, which we did. I was brought in. I was there for the second trial, and it worked. But I remember Jenny telling me this. She said, and I got to put it in a nice way, Jenny did her show, and nobody wanted to put her on The Tonight Show or any other show because of the kind of show she did, even though she was a stand-up comic and very funny person and a nice person. But Rosie O'Donnell got the cover of Time magazine. And let me just say, it isn't all what it looks like. The queen of nice for Rosie. And Jenny would say to me sometimes, how does it work this way? I said, that's the kind of show you're doing. And but she's a lovely person. She really is. And the show did nothing wrong, which was finally proven in court but it took a long time of everybody thinking it did a bad thing.
After that happened, did the show change, or did some of the mechanics about the show change?
No, because the show did nothing wrong. Actually, nothing wrong. But I didn't know that either. When I got the telepictures, I said, uh-oh, they really did a bad thing here. They caused a murder. At least that's what I learned from Nancy Grace. Then I read the facts and learned the facts, and they did nothing wrong. It just happened to be a lover's tiff that happened after the show and had nothing to do with the show.
When you got there, did you make any changes to the show as it was current programming? Or?
No. It's all the changes I made either in Ricky or in Jenny or in any of those shows was never in anybody's face. My way of managing the shows was always to not get on the executive producer, but to sit in meetings and say things like, well, this may be stupid, but have you ever thought about? I would never tell them what to do because I think the reaction would always be a knee-jerk reaction. We're not listening to that. But if I brought it up as kind of a semi-dumb idea, I found that about half of them would finally take effect. And so I've always managed in kind of a very sweet way, but I still try to get things done. And when I had to fire people, I had to fire people, and when I had to get tough, I had to get tough. But there's a lot of management skills that I learned that worked for me. Never bawl out anybody in public. Never bawl out anybody in front of their peers. You compliment in public, you reprimand in private. Little things that you probably learned in first grade, but this is an upside down town in my opinion. A lot of Hollywood is who's stronger than who's got the power, who's going to force someone to knuckle under. It's just the way it is. I'm lucky that I came out here at the age of 50, and I don't know what I would have been like if I came out here at 22. I might have been the same as I am now, but it was easier to come out later in life and live by the values I've always had. And they worked for me. So anyway, that was my days at Telepictures were fun. We put on, trying to remember what we put on.
You did Change of Heart?
Change of Heart. Change of Heart was one. Change of Heart was a show where 20-somethings, usually early 20-somethings, have been dating for 6 to 9 months. We figured that's about the time the passion starts to wear off and little things start bothering each other. And that's the people we wanted. We wanted them to be bothered by their boyfriend, girlfriend. And we'd bring them on the show, and we'd find out what they liked and didn't like about their girlfriend, boyfriend. And then we'd fix them up with people who were the opposite of their girlfriend, boyfriend in the things they didn't like. You know, my boyfriend is sloppy, and he doesn't want to work. Well, here we have Mr. Neat, who runs his own business and makes lots of money, right? Our object was trying to break up the couple all the time. But we always looked at it as their choice. The original show title was not Change of Heart. We did that to make it easier. The original title was Trading Up. But we wanted to sell it. It was a late night show. It ran 12:30 across the country. It was one of those little engines that could. It ran 6 years, made the company nice money. Never a big blockbuster like Rosie O'Donnell, but it was just one of those chug, 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 make money. And we used to actually sit in the control room between the end of the segment and before they made their choice and bet on what the choice would be. We had a great time because sometimes you didn't know. But we always knew we had to ask them during the break, who are you going to pick? Because we gave them the right card. And if one was going to stay and one was going to break up, we always went to the stay person first, and then we go to the breakup person because we just made better television. And sometimes they both stay, and sometimes they both break up. But it was a fun show. It was a fun show, and I don't think it was mean at all because they made their own choice. Our job was just to fix them up at another date. Then I did a show. My favorite show I did at Telepictures, because it was so simple and so stupid and so fun, was a show called Street Smarts. Street Smarts ran for 5 years late night, and it was basically going out on the street like Jay Leno and asking people dumb questions and seeing if they know the answer. The game show part of this was we had 2 people in the studio who didn't have to know the answer. They just had to guess if the person on the street would get it right or wrong. Simple. And it was fun to watch, especially for the fact that so many people just don't know. They just don't know. You show them a picture of the Washington Monument, they don't know. You show them a picture of the vice president, they don't know. You ask them what foreign country borders Texas. My favorite answer was New Orleans, which made no sense to me at all. We asked everybody how many states there are in the United States. 2/3 of them got it right, and the other third, about half of those said 52. I can understand that, 50 plus Hawaii and Alaska. But the last sixth, unbelievable, 58, 37, and I'm thinking, oh my God. But it was enjoyable television. And I enjoyed that because it was just real people with real answers to real questions. I'm not going to give you some of the answers because they were pretty, they were not only dumb but pretty risque, but it was a fun show. And the last show I put on when I was at Telepictures is still on the air 14 years later. It was a judge show called Judge Mathis. Greg Mathis was the youngest judge in the state of Michigan, but when he was 17, he was in jail. And he got a GED in jail. He got out of jail by Mayor Coleman Young, who said, you will drop everything if you get your GED. And he promised his mother was dying of cancer, he'd make something of himself. And he wound up going from being in a gang and being in jail to being a lawyer, to being a judge, to being a TV judge. And the backstory sold the show. Our original title for that was From Street to Court, but we decided Judge Mathis made better sense.
How did he get to television?
There were a couple people who worked at Warner Brothers who saw a story about him and contacted him. A guy named Gus Blackman and a fellow named, it escapes me, and they brought him into me. They brought the idea into me, and then they brought him into me. And I liked the idea. I liked him. I liked the fact that the backstory would sell it. Because part of my job wasn't just producing. Part of my job was to produce the sales tape for the salespeople and to come up with a reason to sell. Because part of your job is also sales. And I thought this would sell based on the backstory, and it did. Now, the funny part on this was the first couple of weeks it was on the air, we were getting feedback that he can't be a real judge. I don't know why we were getting that feedback, but we did. So the first thing I did there was, and it's still running at the front of the show, the first thing you see on the show now is real people, real cases, real judge. Just to make sure people knew. But that went on the air in fall of '99, and that's been renewed. So he went from living in a little house in Detroit to living in a mansion and driving a Bentley in Beverly Hills.
How did you differentiate it from something like Judge Judy?
Judge Judy's in a class by herself. That's special. She's just the greatest. But if you can get a judge that, well, first of all, it's about the cases. Secondly, it's about a judge that doesn't tip their hand too early. Actually, I remember the beginning, I put a light on Judge Mathis's desk, a red light that had connection in the control room. And I used to say, no tipping. My thought to the judge was, you're not doing a court show, you're doing a game show. I know this sounds crazy, but it is a game show. The people at home are playing along. They're picking sides, they're trying to figure out who's right and wrong, and the judge is going to decide. So I used to talk to him about no tipping your hand too early, and I had a red light on his desk at the beginning, so if he started tipping too early, we'd push a button in the control room to say, no tipping, no tipping. So these are all the things these are not tricks you learn, they're things you invent as you're going along. Just saying, how do I get to him? It's like the person in Ricky's ear the first year asking most of the questions. But by the time the second year came, she could ask her own questions. It's just making sure you protect the talent, you have a good concept, and you help produce the show well. And that was part of my job. I wasn't just the suit executive. I was hands-on. I spent the summer in Chicago in 1999 as we did some practice shows and other things. And of course, I was still overseeing Extra, which we had a terrific change on in 1996 or 7. Extra was an entertainment show, as it is today. But in 1996 or 7, NBC decided to put on a show called Access Hollywood. And they didn't want 2 entertainment shows back to back. So the head of the NBC stations came to Jim and me and said, in 2 weeks, you're not going to do an entertainment show anymore. you're going to do a show that has no entertainment in it. You're going to do a show with news stories and stuff. I don't care, but no entertainment. And there we were. In 2 weeks, we had to change the entire show. It became a lot more like Inside Edition, but it also became sort of a news show. When Princess Di died, we sent a reporter, David Jackson, to France for like a month. David Jackson was one of my hires in Miami, by the way. A whole bunch of people I hired for Extra went on to pretty good careers, too. Let's see, I hired Phil Schumann, who's at Fox, Lauren Sanchez, who reports from time to time for one of the stations. I can't remember. We hired a bunch of people at Extra who have gone on to nice careers here in L.A. But we changed immediately, and we had stories that were a little weird. I remember my three favorite stories. The Catwoman in New York, the one who had so much plastic surgery she looks like a cat. The boy with no nerves. He had no nerve endings. He had to wear gloves and things on his elbow and things on his knees. He could put his hand on a fire and he wouldn't feel it. Terrible story. Happens to one in a zillion, but it was a very interesting story. And then we had another one about a kid who couldn't go out in the daytime. Could only go out at night. I mean, these are kind of Barnum and Bailey stories, but they were true stories that happened around the U.S., and that's what Extra became for quite a while, a few years, thanks to NBC telling us no entertainment. And finally, I think they let entertainment back in the early 2000s. But that was kind of crazy because I'd have to go to 6:30 in the morning meetings at Extra. So we'd plan the day out, and then at 9 I'd go to my job and work till 7. And the one thing I realized looking back is I worked long, long hours for most of my life, but I loved it. I just loved it. So that was some of the Telepicture years.
Oh, actually, Rosie O'Donnell's show was also...
The Rosie O'Donnell show, but that was going on when I got there.
It was.
So it wasn't my idea, it was Jim's. But I supervised part of that show, and it was fun. When it came to L.A. the first time, I hired Gary Owens as the announcer to give a little laugh into the back of it. And there were different kinds of shows between Jenny and Extra and Rosie, and then the late night shows, Change Your Heart and Street Smarts. We had a lot of shows going, and Paratori, who was brilliant, came up with Ellen after I left, came up with TMZ with Harvey Levin, and he was a very bright guy who had a heart attack and died on the spot about 2 years ago.
What do you think was your greatest contribution to Telepictures?
I would guess, looking back now, it's Judge Mathis. How many times do you have a 14, 15-year-old show on the air that keeps chugging out money? But my favorite show was Street Smarts. And I had a lot of contribution in different ways to Extra and Jenny and things like that. But I think you got to go with, as I learned at Cap City, is the thing that brings you the money. So that was my Telepicture years. Then when my deal was up, I left because I found out that working for Jim was not as much fun as Jim working for me. We still remained friends, but I didn't want to do another 4 years. So I bounced around for a couple of months not doing anything because I did okay. I did well enough when we got the bonus at the station to put some money in the bank. And when I left Warner Brothers, talk about timing, I left Warner Brothers and they had awarded me some stock. Not a lot, but some stock. A week after I left Warner Brothers, the beginning of 2000, I'm in Hawaii with my wife on vacation, and on CNN pops up Time Warner going to merge with AOL. And the stock, which was at $17 or $18 a share, just went by on the TV screen at $100 and some a share. So I kind of stumbled as fast as I could to the lobby to send in a fax, please sell my stuff. I get a fax back, you're in line with everybody else, we might get to you by tomorrow. And we wound up selling it, I think, at $91 a share, which was really incredible. It wasn't a lot of shares, but it was good money, and that helped. Talk about luck and timing, because I think the rule was 3 months out of Warner Brothers, you had to sell your stock, and this was less than 2 weeks. Sometimes you have to be lucky. Once I was bankrupt, now I had a few bucks. So then I wound up getting hired. Now, that was part 2 of my career, or part 3. Let's see, I had stations, I had production companies, then I had studio. Okay, now I'm on to part 4, programming a network. I was hired by Margaret Lesh at Odyssey, which became the Hallmark Channel, to be the head of programming for the channel, which was great. Now I get to program a network, even if it might not be ABC, it's a network. And we were Odyssey, a religious-based company when I got there, but we knew we were changing to the Hallmark Channel. And my job was to help with the concept of how to change and how to brand it and how to program it. And I couldn't use the one and only because that's my station days. But the Hallmark Channel brought with it some pluses and some minuses. Everybody loves Hallmark because it's clean. Hard to program because it's clean, right? The first thing I did, I remember, was looking at their program schedule. They had shows that people weren't watching. There were nice dramas from Canada. There were nice dramas from the U.S., but they weren't getting anybody to watch. And I suggested that we become Nick at Night in the afternoon. I said, if Nick at Night works from 8 to 11, why can't we be Nick at Night from 4 to 8? Let's buy shows when people are remoting around, they'll stop to watch. And so we wound up, and Margaret agreed, so we wound up buying I Dream of Jeannie, Bewitched, Happy Days. I remember this. And we wound up buying America's Funniest Home Videos, but not till we had a discussion. I came in, I said, I want to buy America's Funniest Home Videos. Margaret said, don't people get hit between the legs with baseballs and stuff on that show? I said, yes. She said, I'm not sure Hallmark wants to go for that. And so I called an ex-station guy I knew named Vin DeBona, who produced America's Funniest Home Videos, which has been on the air like 25 years. And I said, how do I handle this? And Vin says, tell her that when the people get hit between the legs, they usually are the people at the end of the show sitting in the audience laughing, going for the big prize. I said, oh, isn't that great? You do that? He says, no, but tell her that. So I did. And we bought it. And it went through the roof at 7 o'clock. It went through the roof. So all of a sudden, the channel that wasn't being watched was watched a lot between 4 and 8. And then we had one of their old goody two-shoes shows, Dr. Quinn, at 8, which worked. And then we ran movies at 9. And so the channel was starting to get a lot of traction, which was great. And I think we tripled or quadrupled the ratings all in 6 months. Very proud of that. And then, Margaret doesn't get renewed. And they bring in this woman who I don't think had a clue about television. And she decides, this is Hollywood, I want my own people. She wiped out the head of promotion, me. She wiped out like 6 department heads because they were hired by Margaret. Okay? And so I'm out of a job. I'm now 60 years old in Hollywood. I got paid the end of my deal, but that sounds good. But when you're 60, it's not good. And the lady who came in lasted about 7 months and got fired because she was an idiot. Meanwhile, all the carnage she created was terrible. Sometimes that happens. I was not feeling good then. And for the next 3 or 4 years, I had a piece-by-piece career. I had now programmed the network. I was really successful at it, but I still got wiped out in the big wipeout. And now I started looking for other ways to make a living because nobody wanted me, too old. So I wound up becoming an expert witness in trials, which was fun.
What kind of trials?
I can't disclose most of them, but there was someone who sued a well-known reality show for stealing his idea. And my job was to show that the idea really was stolen. I was on his side. And that thing settled the day before the trial. But I had already given my deposition. And a lot of reading. And you get paid for reading. So it's kind of lucrative, expert witnessing. You get paid for reading depositions. I also started consulting with different internet companies. A few worked, a few didn't. I forgot the name of the internet company. That was an aggregator of local newscasts, something I understood. They would go to local newscasts and say, we're going to take all your pieces and separate them out. There'll be sports and there'll be medical and there'll be this and that. And we're going to have people come on the internet if they want to see all the sports news in New England. They can get it from Boston, and they can get it from Hartford, and they can get it from Portland, Maine. Or you want to see a newscast from Sacramento and you're on vacation in Florida, you can see it. Great idea, but they ran out of angel money. So I consulted for them a while. I did get paid, that was good. I eventually wound up with a company called Entertainment Media Works, which had I thought, a fabulous idea, which was, the original title was See That Again, and then they changed their name to Star Style. This is a company that decided when you're watching TV and you see a dress or a purse or a lamp that you like on TV, how do you get it? I want to buy that, right? Nobody could figure it out. This company said, well, if we make deals with all the producers of all the shows, you can come on our site, find out where to get it, find out where to get something like it, and we'll make money on the click-throughs and on the sales. My job, among other things, was to make the deals with all the producers. And I remember the first deal I made was with The Young and the Restless, because we figured soap opera people will buy the most. And we had to catalog every piece of equipment, everything on the stage. We had to catalog every dress that everybody wore. But we did. And we took pictures of it, and we had it up on our site. And then I made a deal with a couple of shows on UPN at the time, and we started branching out, and it was a great idea. And the idea eventually was supposed to be you could actually click on the product on the set, and it'll pop up on the set. Well, we were ahead of our time, but we didn't get there. I remember the reason this was very interesting to me is this is the way life works. About a week before they came to me with this idea and wanted to know if I would work with them, my wife saw something on Friends. I think it was Friends, or she had seen it earlier. She saw a briefcase she wanted. Jennifer Aniston had it. She had no idea where to get this briefcase. But I know it was back in the Warner Brothers days. So I called people at Warner Brothers and said, where's that from? Oh, we bought it at this store on the West Side. Oh. And so now these people come to me about this idea, and I'm thinking, I've lived this already. By the way, in my house, I have a 4-cup set from the original 2.5 Men, the nice circular pretty cups. Because when I saw them, I said, I want them. And it was a company out of Carson or something like that did them. So I still think it's a good idea. I never finished up with that company, and I think they ran out of money because a lot of this was angel money. But the day we were celebrating that we made a deal with somebody was the day I was offered the job at the TV Academy. So that was my internet years, my years as an expert witness, my years in the internet. I learned a lot about business to consumer internet. And things move so fast, I'm sure what I learned is worthless now. But at the time, it was very forward-thinking. We really were ahead of the game on the aggregation of news, which you can do now just by iHeartRadio or TV, and especially Star Style, which no one has perfected yet, which I still think is a great idea. And then at the beginning of 2006, I was called by a headhunter for the TV Academy. So that was the quick internet job, real little. And then I was called by the TV Academy to see if I wanted to interview to be COO, which I did, and I got the job. And I spent the better part of 8 years here at the TV Academy as COO, and it was probably my favorite job. It's very up there with my WPLG days. It has less influence than the PLG job. When you're a general manager in a medium-sized market, you're like the publisher of a newspaper, and you're very important in the city, and you know all the movers and shakers. In this job, I work for governors, and I work for officers, and I work for members, so it didn't have the kind of power. But there was a side to this job that I loved, which was meeting the icons I saw on TV when I was young. I mean, how often can you have lunch with Stan Freberg or Carl Reiner or Betty White? which I did. And I know these are older people, but these are the people I watched on black and white TV when I was a kid. And just like working with Dick Clark, it was just wonderful. It's a dream come true for a kid from Cleveland, because watching the black and white images, you never think that you're going to ever meet any of these people. It never even enters your mind that you're going to know these people, even if it's in a business sense. And to be able to spend some time with each of them really has made me very fulfilled and happy. My job at the Academy was pretty good. We, again, goes all the way back to Cap Cities. Follow the money. I wanted to make sure the Academy would be much stronger when I left it financially than when we started. And I did little things all along, which increasing the amount of Emmy Magazine that we did, and then increasing the rates on Emmy Magazine, and then increasing the costs of getting into the contest for the Emmys, increasing membership dues, all these little things. And not a lot, but all of these things mount up to be a lot of money. And watching the expenses where we really don't go up too much every year. And all that went to the bottom line. And I left almost 8 years later with our bottom line being more than double when I came in. And I always used to say, now we can do anything we want here, as opposed to the government that first spends it and then tries to figure out how to bring it in. We brought it in, now we can spend it. And that's part of my business background. But on the personal side, the people in this TV Academy, the staff, it's just a great group of people, really is. And I didn't have to make many changes, if at all. I think there was one. And again, my feeling about you go in and you assess the people that are there, and if they're good enough, they may not be A students, but if they're B students, good enough, and especially in a nonprofit. And I just enjoyed meeting and dealing with the people for almost the entire 8 years almost. And so that was the other part of my multi-career.
Let's talk a little bit more about your work as COO. When you first came in, were you tasked with anything specific?
Yes, the first thing they told me was the fellow who was the liaison with me, a governor named Dan Berman, said, your job is to calm down the staff. I said, what the hell does that mean? He said, well, your predecessor kind of rattled them up. He said a lot of people were unhappy. Some were happy, but a lot of people were unhappy because apparently he was mean to people or difficult to people or whatever. I don't know. But he did say you have to calm them down. And that, I'm a kind of a calming influence manager. I don't yell at people, and as I said earlier, I don't berate anybody in public. If you did something wrong, I'll talk to you in private. If you made a mistake, I don't tell you you're stupid. I tell you you did something stupid. And little things like that you can learn in first grade or second grade that people seem to forget. Just treat people with some dignity. And so I eventually, I think, calmed them down. And that was my task. That was the only task I was given when I came in. I worked for 3 different chairmen over my career here. It was Dick Askin, the guy who hired me with a search committee and the company that hired me. Then I worked for 4 years for John Schaffner, who was a set designer and a lovely human being. And then the last 2 years I worked for Bruce Rosenblum, who was a studio executive at Warner Brothers and now is at Legendary. And they all had different ways of managing, and I had to adapt to each one. And I figured out the first time in my life I worked for people who didn't hire me. The entire career I had, I always worked for the person who hired me. And all of a sudden at the Academy, I worked for 2 bosses that never hired me. Much more difficult. And not difficult in the sense that I couldn't take it, just difficult in the fact that they're strangers every few years. But it's been a great experience, and I can't even remember the wonderful things that we've done, but I've always believed you leave a place stronger than when you showed up. And I did. And I must say that to blow my own horn, I believe I'm the only person in the history of TV to have done the specific kinds of jobs I've done. Local TV, network programming, production companies, studio work. And if anybody ties that, I can always throw in the Academy. And I'm proud of that because you know what? They're all challenges, and I've always enjoyed doing new things. And if I didn't have to work 5 days a week in this job, I never would have left. But at this point, I'm tired of working 5 days a week and some evenings. So I'm retired.
What do you think is the overall mission of the TV Academy?
Well, when I was working in local TV, the main objectives was to protect the license. You can't make money and you can't do anything if you lose your license to the FCC. And the one objective I had here in my own mind was protect the brand. Make sure that the Emmy brand stays unsullied. When I came in, I found out that the awards process is clean and beautiful, and you can't fault anything in it for being wrong. I mean, it's really quite pristine. And that's important because that's the award we give out. And the other things we do all fall from that. But the members are from a big cross-section of the industry. We've gone from, when I showed up, 13 or 14,000 members to 18,000. I'm proud of that. Not that I had a lot to do with it, but I think it should grow. The bigger it grows, the better the voting for the Emmy will be. The more people you have voting, the more reliable statistically it'll be. And I learned that from Nielsen, statistical reliability. If you did a Sunday show and the Hut level was 2 and you got a 1 and a 50 share, great. But the odds are you could have a 0.3 or a 1.8 because statistical reliability fluctuates with the smaller audience. The bigger the audience, the more reliable. The bigger the sample, the more reliable. And the bigger the amount of members in the Academy, the more reliable the voting will be in every category. So my goal also was to help increase the amount of members. I still think there should be some membership drives. What I found over the years is many ideas I had didn't quite make it through the Board of Governors. I still believe there's a lot of things that can be done. I still have argument with the networks for not letting us run past 3 hours. I don't get it. The Oscars run 3.5. The Grammys run 3.5. We have to run 3. We have as many awards as any other show. They complain that we don't want you to run late and have the late news start late. As a guy who ran stations, and as a guy who has a wife that sold commercials, and as a guy who has friends who run stations all over America, it's not a problem. The third weekend or the Sunday in September, on a Sunday night, when you know months in advance your news will start later, is not a problem at all. But as I've learned, most network people never worked in local TV, so they don't know. The fact is, you tell somebody the show's going to go to 11:15 or 11:20, the local stations can handle it. And the way Nielsen rates things, you can get your rating till 11, and if you go to 11:20, you only get credit to going to 11:15 because you didn't have the major portion of the 15 minutes. And so everybody would win. But that's a fight I lost every year with every network. I don't get it. I just don't get it. And it would open up the show for more entertainment, and it would loosen it up and make it more enjoyable.
Stop there to change the tape.
Okay. I was just getting on my roll of how to fix things.
I know. Well, we got one more